cruiser was discovered just before dawn at mile marker 143, parked at an unnatural angle on the shoulder, as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. Its engine was still running, headlights burning holes through the early morning fog, and the light bar continued to spin in slow, hypnotic circles that painted the swamp in pulses of red and blue. The driver's door stood open. The radio whispered static. Trooper Evan Leroux was nowhere to be found, and the swamp around the highway felt heavier than it ever had, as though it were listening. Evan had worked Louisiana highways long enough to respect the places that made the hair on his neck rise. Mile marker 143 was one of them. The road narrowed there, swallowed by cypress trees and black water that reflected the sky like a broken mirror. Locals avoided stopping on that stretch, and even veteran troopers felt uneasy when their patrol routes took them through after midnight. Still, Evan was the kind of officer who answered calls without complaint. At 2:11 a.m., he radioed in a routine traffic stop, his voice steady, professional, ordinary in every way. 2 minutes later, dispatch tried to check on him. There was no reply. When Evan finally keyed his mic again, his voice sounded distant, warped by interference that shouldn't have been there. He said there was another cruiser on scene, a statement that made no sense. No unit had been dispatched nearby, and no one acknowledged responding. Before dispatch could ask for clarification, the transmission dissolved into static mixed with a faint, wet sound, like footsteps moving through shallow water. Backup arrived to find Evan's cruiser exactly where he had left it. His campaign hat lay on the pavement beside the open door, perfectly dry despite the heavy fog. His flashlight rested on the seat, still on, its beam cutting through mist and illuminating nothing. There were no footprints, no skid marks, no sign of a struggle. It was as if Evan had simply stepped out of existence. Search teams combed the swamp for days, finding only deep water, thick roots, and a silence that pressed in on them from all sides. Among the older troopers, the disappearance stirred memories no one liked to revisit. Decades earlier, another officer had vanished at the same mile marker under nearly identical circumstances. That case had been buried under paperwork and time, but the road remembered. It always did. 3 nights after Evan disappeared, a rookie dispatcher heard a familiar call sign come through her headset. The voice was calm, clear, unmistakable. Even Leroux was calling in a traffic stop at mile marker 143. The room fell silent as supervisors rushed in, assuming a malfunction. They tried to respond, but the voice returned on its own, mentioning an uncooperative driver before cutting out abruptly. No cruiser was logged there. No unit acknowledged seeing anything on their dash cams. Reports began trickling in from civilians soon after. A truck driver claimed a state trooper had pulled him over on that stretch of highway, only to vanish when he stepped out of his cab. A family said they saw flashing lights in their rearview mirror, then nothing at all. Each account shared the same unsettling detail. The trooper never spoke, never moved much, and seemed soaked, as if he had just climbed out of the swamp itself. The department quietly adjusted patrol routes, instructing troopers not to initiate stops near mile marker 143 unless absolutely necessary. Even Leroux was eventually declared dead, his body unrecovered, his badge never found. Yet the calls never completely stopped. Every so often, usually during foggy nights when the swamp crept close to the road, a transmission would slip through the radio, static-laced, calm and patient. They called it a road only out of habit, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt slicing through miles of Louisiana swamp, where the trees leaned inward and sunlight rarely touched the ground. Official maps gave it a number, but troopers knew it by reputation alone. If your patrol route took you there after midnight, you drove faster, spoke less, and never stopped unless ordered. Too many officers had vanished along that stretch for coincidence to explain it away. Trooper Marcus Hebert learned about the road his first month on night shift. The warning came quietly, passed from one veteran to another while lockers slammed shut and radios crackled to life. Cars stalled there without explanation. GPS units spun uselessly. Radios picked up whispers instead of dispatch. And sometimes, troopers arrived at roll call the next day, unable to remember entire hours of their shift, their uniforms soaked with swamp water they couldn't explain. Marcus didn't believe in ghost stories, but belief didn't matter the night his cruiser engine died right in the middle of that stretch. One moment he was rolling at 55, the next the dashboard went black and the engine coughed into silence. The swamp closed in immediately. Fog drifted low over the road, thick enough to swallow his headlights. When he reached for the radio, it hissed with static so loud it hurt his ears. He stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching softly on gravel. The air smelled of rotten stagnant water, heavy and wet in his lungs. Somewhere nearby, something splashed. Marcus told himself it was an animal, but the sound repeated, slow and deliberate, like footsteps pacing him from the tree line. He shined his flashlight into the swamp and caught movement. Shadows slipping between cypress trunks, always just out of reach. The radio suddenly crackled to life. A voice came through, calm and professional, using an old call sign Marcus recognized from training manuals. The trooper who owned that call sign had died years earlier, swept away during a flood while responding to a crash on this very road. The voice asked Marcus if he needed assistance. When Marcus tried to answer, the radio cut out again, leaving only the sound of insects and his own breathing. Minutes stretched unnaturally long. Marcus felt disoriented, his thoughts slowing, the road behind him seeming farther away than it should have been. He noticed then that the fog wasn't moving like fog should. It curled inward, forming vague shapes that stood where people might stand. His flashlight flickered, and for a split second, he saw a cruiser parked ahead of him, an older model, half sunk into mud, its light bar dark. Blinking hard, he looked again. The cruiser was gone. When his engine finally roared back to life on its own, Marcus didn't question it. He climbed in, slammed the door, and drove until the swamp thinned and the road widened, not stopping until the sun began to rise. At roll call, supervisors noticed his uniform smelled of swamp water, his boots stained dark with mud. Marcus couldn't explain how it got there. Worse, he couldn't account for nearly 40 minutes of his shift. Other troopers had similar stories. Some remembered voices guiding them off the road and back to safety. Others recalled seeing fellow officers standing motionless among the trees, uniforms faded, faces pale, eyes reflecting light too brightly. A few never came back at all. Their cruisers were found days later, engines cold, doors open, radios softly humming. Official reports blamed accidents, disorientation, equipment failure. Unofficially, the road earned a new rule: no solo patrols, no stops, no responses unless lives were clearly at risk. Even then, dispatch kept units moving through quickly, as if lingering too long invited something to notice. It began as a routine transport, the kind Louisiana state troopers handled without a second thought. Trooper Nathan Collier picked up the prisoner just after sunset from a rural parish jail, tucked between sugarcane fields and swamp. The man had been found wandering along a back road, barefoot, clothes torn and soaked, unable or unwilling to explain where he came from. He hadn't resisted arrest. He hadn't spoken at all. He had only stared, eyes unblinking, reflecting light in a way that made the deputies uneasy. Nathan secured him in the back of the cruiser and started the long drive toward Baton Rouge. The sky darkened fast, swallowing the last strip of orange on the horizon. The prisoner sat perfectly still behind the cage, hands resting calmly in his lap. Too calm. Nathan checked the rearview mirror more times than he cared to admit. Every time, the man's eyes were already on him. 10 miles in, Nathan noticed the smell. It wasn't sweat or decay, but something damp and metallic, like rain hitting rusted iron. The radio crackled with static, briefly cutting out dispatch. When it came back, the dispatcher's voice sounded distant, distorted. She asked Nathan to confirm his status. Before he could answer, the prisoner leaned forward, close enough for Nathan to feel his breath on the back of his neck. "You shouldn't take this road," the man said softly. Nathan nearly swerved. It was the first time the prisoner had spoken, his voice low and smooth, carrying an accent Nathan couldn't place. He ordered the man to sit back, to keep quiet. The prisoner obeyed instantly, folding back into stillness like a machine powering down. The road narrowed as swamp pressed in on both sides. Cypress trees loomed overhead, their branches hanging like broken ribs. Nathan felt the sensation of being watched grow stronger with every mile. When he glanced into the mirror again, the prisoner was smiling, not wide, not friendly, just enough. Nathan radioed dispatch to request another unit meet him halfway. Static answered. Then a voice came through. Not dispatch, but something layered beneath it, whispering half, words that made his skin crawl. The dashboard lights flickered. The engine stuttered once, then stabilized. A sharp clang echoed from the back seat. Nathan pulled over instinctively, heart pounding. He exited the cruiser, weapon drawn, and approached the rear door. The prisoner was no longer seated. He was standing, crouched low despite the cage, hands gripping the metal bars. Nathan froze. The man's wrists were bent at unnatural angles, the bones shifting under the skin as if they weren't meant to be there. "You left the water?" the prisoner said. "That was your mistake." The cuffs snapped. Nathan stumbled backward as the man straightened, joints cracking loudly. His face seemed to change in the flashing lights, features blurring, eyes darkening, until they reflected nothing at all. The swamp went silent, insects cutting off at once. Nathan raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the lights died. When they came back, the cruiser was empty. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. They found Nathan standing barefoot in the road, uniform soaked to the waist, gun missing, eyes glassy and unfocused. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. He wasn't built for the road. Nathan survived, but he never returned to duty. Doctors called it shock. The department called it an equipment failure and closed the case quietly. No prisoner matching the description was ever logged into the system. No fingerprints, no name. Months later, another trooper reported transporting a silent suspect along the same route. The dash cam footage showed the back seat empty the entire time. Yet the audio captured a second voice breathing calmly behind the cage, whispering directions off the road and toward the swamp.